All right, hello everyone and welcome to today's Scrum at Scale webinar presentation. My name is Alyssa Layden and I'm the product owner of marketing for Scrum at Scale LLC. Before introducing today's speaker and panelists, I would like to briefly cover just a few minor housekeeping items. First, to provide you with the best listening experience, all audio lines except for the host and the panelists will be muted during the webinar. If at any time during the presentation you would like to ask a question or add a comment to the discussion, please use the Q&A panel on your console. And finally, this presentation is being recorded and will be available to play on demand from both the Scrum at Scale website and the Scrum at Scale YouTube channel within 24 hours. Live viewings and on-demand viewings of Scrum at Scale webinars are eligible for 1 SEU from our parent company, Scrum Alliance. All right, and we are now ready to kick today's webinar off. And for that, I would like to introduce our panel facilitator, Dave Whitkin. Take it away, Dave.
Great, thanks Alyssa, and thank you everybody for joining. We are excited about this panel. One of the things that a lot of you told us was that you really wanted not rainbows and unicorns. You really wanted real world stories about how we use Scrum at Scale to transform companies, organizations, even parts of businesses. So that was the genesis of this panel here. So what we've assembled for you is a group of people with a strong amount of experience, years and years of experience, actually implementing Scrum and Scrum at Scale. And we're going to introduce them. But before we do, I think Alyssa is going to put up a poll that's going to help us understand you a little bit better. Specifically, the poll is going to be about the challenges that you've had if you have tried to scale Scrum. And that might just be, going from 1 team to 2 teams to 3 teams, or it might be something much more, much larger, much more grand, like trying to scale to a whole company. So while you fill out the survey, it's up there now. While you fill that out, we're going to have the panelists go ahead and introduce themselves. So why don't we start with Mr. JJ Sutherland. JJ.
Hi, I'm JJ Sutherland. Thanks, Dave. I am the CEO of Scrum Inc., the company founded by my father, Jeff Sutherland, who developed both Scrum and Scrum at Scale. I'm the author of a few books about Scrum, and I'm excited to be here with all these people who know this very, very well.
Great, thank you. Rena, why don't we move on to you?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Hi from Helsinki, Finland. My name is Riina Hellström. I'm an Agile Enterprise Coach working as a CEO for a small consulting company called People Geeks. We're about 10 people working with clients around the world. Also as a co-founder of the Agile HR community, which is bringing agility into HR, and soon to be an author about Agile HR too. Happy to be here, working a lot with executives and support functions around the transformations.
Awesome. Thanks, Rena. Lizzie, you next.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lizzie. And as you know, if you've seen me anywhere, I'm passionate about people. So I'm really, really excited about what Scrum at Scale does for teams and for the individuals involved. So you'll hear me giving the spin on that as we go through this whole discussion. So I'm looking forward to it.
Outstanding. Thanks. Daniel?
Hi, I'm Daniel Mesick. I'm working from my undisclosed location here in North Guilford, Connecticut, USA. I've been working with Scrum since 2006, and I've written 3 books on organizational change. I'm a Scrum at Scale trainer and a licensed Scrum trainer with Scrum Inc., and I'm happy to be here to serve you and answer your toughest questions with the rest of the panel.
Awesome. Daniel? Oh, I'm sorry. I hit Daniel. Simon is what I meant to say.
Hi, thank you very much. My name's Simon Roberts. I'm a certified Scrum trainer and a Scrum at Scale trainer based in Scotland, on the west coast of Scotland. Currently in Hanover, in Germany. I do a lot of work with mostly larger companies, quite conservative companies, telcos and financial sector companies, helping them to take their first steps with Scrum and then get really good. And I'm passionate about using Scrum or using Scrum to help organizations to move away from Taylorism, where the workforce was divided up into the thinkers and the doers. I want everybody to be thinkers and to bring their ideas to the workforce and to drive engagement up so that people love to come to work.
Outstanding. And before we move on, just a little bit about me. As Alyssa said, I'm Dave Witkin. My focus is primarily on the US federal government. I've been doing Scrum at a team level since about 2004 or so. And like everybody else, I'm just passionate about bringing this to larger organizations and bigger implementations. So with that, Alyssa, we want to share the results of the survey before we jump in.
Yes, we do. So we just ended. It looks like about 65% of people were able to answer, and it was a multiple choice poll. So you were able to see a couple of different options. And it looks like they're pretty well across the board.
Okay, good. Well, look, I think for those of us who have done Scrum for a long time, some of these already, no surprise, the number one thing on here, people don't seem to do team level Scrum well. We're going to talk about scaling and where that fits in, but absolutely, I think most of the folks here are going to have a prerequisite that we have to be doing team level Scrum well, or else you don't scale things effectively. Middle management as well. This is something we hear a lot. Middle management often has a hard time with the change because a lot of times their roles change and change is difficult for people. So I think we've got a few people like Daniel who are going to talk to us about organizational change and things that can help there. And then finally, why don't we have the org structure also related? Org structure actually looks like our number one. The structure makes it tough. So one of the things I love about Scrum at Scale is it does not skimp on thinking about tough questions like how might we reorganize things, right? It doesn't just try to map Scrum roles to people and say that's good enough. There are organizational considerations. So hopefully we'll spend a little time and get into that as well. All right. And that's great. Thank you everybody for participating. Now what we're going to do, we're going to jump into a slide or two and introduce a few key topics. Then we're going to have our panelists jump in and give a brief introduction to them, and then some real world stories about how it's worked for them. So why don't we start? I think, Rena, we've got you first. Alyssa, if you don't mind sharing the slides. They should be popping up for everybody.
I think it was Simon first.
Oh, is that right? You are right. Simon, you are first. Thank you. So the slides should be popping up for everybody. Simon, we got you on mute right now. If you want to take yourself off and talk us through.
And there we are. Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to talk a little bit about getting started Scrum at Scale, and then I'm going to just give you a very brief story about how that worked out in a particular case with a client. I think the first thing is, before you start to scale, you need to have a really good reference model. You need to be doing good Scrum, and essentially the nutshell of that is the Scrum guide plus the Scrum patterns. The patterns described by the relatively new book, a Scrum book, The Spirit of the Game, based on the huge body of work that a group of people have done over several years. The Scrum Patterns community, documented at scrumplop.org. There really is little point in scaling something that's not great. So first of all, start off with a few teams and get really good with them. The next thing is that one of the things that really attracts me, I find really actually almost unique about Scrum at Scale, is it comes with a built-in assessment approach. So using a heat map, which I think was, I believe that was derived from some work at Google, this sort of approach, but applied to Scrum at Scale, you can assess the current state of each component of Scrum at Scale using a heat map. So we use symbols and different colored post-its to get a group of individuals or teams, and I've actually done it with individuals and teams, to get them to assess themselves how they're doing with things like, what is their senior leadership team actually working on getting rid of impediments? So that's one of the factors. Then we need to rank the components of Scrum at Scale by importance. I think I've given a hint already, the team level process should be, you need to do that really well just before you start to scale, but there will be other components that come on later. Then we can combine that ranking with the assessment, and we can actually start to make some sense out of the data. Out of that comes a prioritization, and then we can use that to create a transformation backlog. Can we go to the next slide, please? That's the theory, and then we just execute the change. That's the theory, but change is really hard. Yeah? So if change is introduced without participation, let's just say, okay, the senior leadership team just come up with that change and then tell people to do it. That will generate resistance and fear. Fight or flight will dominate, and people won't be open to new ideas. They'll be simple instead of complex thinking. Yeah? So we need to really address that. I think it's a bit of an oxymoron, really, to say that Agile is all about self-organization, but we tell people to do it. Can we go on to the next slide, please? So I've been inspired by Daniel, who's on the panel, and I think he's one of his approaches is leadership needs to be about invitation. And what I've really taken on board, and I'm a long-time user of open space, independent of open space agility, is that the goal of leaders, if they want to introduce Agile, is to invite staff to implement it. And that requires real choice from the workforce, for example, to say no. And some of the techniques that I've really found extremely useful are open space agility, founded by Daniel and documented by Daniel and others in his book and in other books. And also I've drawn on the work, a lot of it from the large-scale Scrum, less people on self-selecting teams. And other things I found very useful, intent-based leadership from David Marquet, fearless change from Linda and Mary Lynn, fantastic source of ideas on helping people to change.
Excellent.
So one of my clients, we've been combining these ideas, absolutely Scrum at scale, but using open space agility, and the early indications are it's really driving engagement.
Yeah, excellent. Anybody want to jump in? So obviously, Simon, a lot of the focus introducing the topic of how we introduce this, right? Everybody knows, and you alluded to this, the perfect world scenario rarely plays out. So somebody talk to me about, who wants to jump in and talk about how this process worked at one of their clients? Anyone? All right, no one. I'll jump in and tell you that at one of my recent clients, a US government client, we kind of took the path that Simon talked about. And one of the things that happened right away is we realized that people didn't really understand. When we say we need to get some leadership buy-in, right, to help us, people didn't understand what leadership buy-in meant. They meant, yeah, we say we want to do Scrum at scale. It's fantastic. Go figure it out. Do what you want to do. Leave me alone, though, and tell me if you need something from me. And unfortunately, one of the things that we found is that doesn't work so well. So it can work if you're trying to implement Scrum at scale down at a few team level, maybe a few parts of the organization. But when we got to looking at scaling, right, doing it across a large organization, it became very clear that without setting as part of our model, something that said, here's the type of participation we really need from you leaders, from executives, that the rest of the change just stalled. So, and it looks like, JJ, you want to comment on that?
I would agree with you, Dave. I mean, when we do a transformation, we always start with as high up in the leadership as we can get, because that is really the place to start. The one place I don't quite agree with Simon is just invitation is often not enough. And when there is a corporation that is in a real trouble and they need to do stuff quickly, sometimes they need to say there are rules about coming to work. and that because often there is resistance from a middle management, as people say, and there is resistance from people whose roles are going to change. And sometimes that needs to be dealt with directly, candidly, and forcefully, because in some of my clients, they are dealing with insurgent. I deal with large clients as well, very large, and they are dealing with insurgent behavior and insurgent threats, sometimes existential threats. And that, in those kind of cases, I think it's great. I think what you described is fantastic when that works, and when the space and there's the trust and there's the openness that can do that. That is not terribly common in my experience. Some places, yes. Most places, no. Your mileage may vary on that one.
Let me go to Daniel. I think I saw Daniel next. You have some thoughts?
Yeah, I have some thoughts on this. Harrison Owen, who's the inventor, discoverer of open space, I asked him one day, Harrison, how do you get executives to actually do this open space stuff? And he goes, it's really simple. He says, I just wait till they're desperate. Now, that's actually a great strategy, because a lot of these organizations have no interest at all in changing until they are desperate. And if we look at the Scrum Guide, we could look at it through the lens of sort of a social scientist noticing that it's a system of decision rights in 3 roles. You know, it has rules, artifacts, events. It also has non-adherence to these rules, and the rules are mostly about decision rights. So I think a really good strategy is to go around and make sure everyone understands how decision processing is going to change under Scrum. And let's all get clear on that together, so we all know what's about to happen to our jobs, right? People who make decisions today will not be making them tomorrow. That will feel like a demotion to some people, but it's in service to increasing the flow of value. So a little bit later, I'll talk about getting aligned on that. I agree with JJ, and I join with him in that idea that you have to be a little forceful, and that it's not a free-for-all. On the other hand, I've never seen a good, legitimate, genuine, authentic, lasting change stick without engaged employees. So I think it has something to do with some minimum amount of decisions that people are making about their own work. And of course, Scrum provides the framework for that.
Good. Thank you, Daniel. I think I saw Rena. I think I saw you next. Did you have something to add?
I actually have, yes. So it comes down to the people who work with the transformation. What kind of a human view we have, because I don't believe there is something called change resistance. If we have the human view of people are smart, willing, they want to do a good job, they want to succeed. But of course, when they hear about agility first time or Scrum, it sounds very strange coming from the waterfall, very pragmatic, planned world. So their first reaction, of course, is what is this? This can't be kind of, I can't trust this, and it will change a lot. And I work a lot with large organizations where they immediately come to their regulations and certifications issues. And the second you start working with these transformations to get people on board in a way which isn't forceful, saying, hey, we're going to teach you what this is about, and you're smart people, you will understand how to start applying this, what works for you, how can you start doing this. I think that is one thing that has worked for us really well, is to not even go there and say, I'm not going to brainwash you, I'm going to tell you what this is, and then let's work out together what this means for you.
Yeah, a lot of smart people, right? Lizzie, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I've taken kind of a little mix of what everybody said. One of the things I've seen work well is when leadership first makes the decision. We're talking about this decision making. Leaders first make the decision that they're going to do this. And I haven't yet, in my experience, seen that it's come without the dental chair experience. That's what I call it. Right? Kind of like the idea, you go to the dentist, and when you're there and they're drilling and, you got a root canal, you make all these personal vows to yourself of all these things you're going to do about oral hygiene after you leave the dentist. And it lasts maybe 2-3 months until you're too tired to really keep it going. That's the problem that often happens when organizations initially decide that they want to do Scrum. It gets going because of the dental chair factor. The difference with when they decide they're willing to do scaling now is they'll have had replicable root canals and they'd like to save the rest of their teeth. right? And at that point now, they are going to lead the change. And in leading the change, everybody realizes it's not something that's just being pushed. It's someplace we're actually all going together. I once did a transformation with an organization where the executive said, I'm okay if people self-select to leave. I'm fine with that. I won't be offended by it, but we're going to create an atmosphere of where we want our company to be tomorrow. And I think ultimately when we start talking about change, the reason people resist is fear. So if we can educate people to what it means, just like Rena said, we can help to minimize the fear factor. If we don't attack the fear, that's when we have mayhem.
Excellent. Thank you, Lizzie. Before we go on, first, I'm really impressed when I see the dentist. 3 months is a really long time for me to continue flossing. So if you can go that long after making those commitments, extremely impressive. So before we move on, though, why don't we throw it over to Alyssa? Alyssa's monitoring the chat window, and she's going to throw out maybe a comment or two from there that we want to throw to the panel.
Yes, definitely. Also, before I do that, I do want to say I'm getting a lot of questions directed either to just my chat window or the chat window in general. If you could put them in the Q&A panel, that helps tremendously to organize them because there are quite a few coming in. But one that I would love to see a couple of different perspectives on, we got one from I think Gail Mata, and is formal agile training a must across a large organization, or can you suffice with just a few staff members trained? You guys are talking about addressing leadership and then also the employee level. So what would be your approach?
Yeah, I think we saw Daniel first. You want to take it?
Yeah, I just want to make a quick comment. There is a real lack of literacy around the Scrum Guide. Scrum at Scale is built upon, the Scrum at Scale guide is built upon the Scrum Guide. I think it says that in the third paragraph. And when you ask people what they know about the Scrum Guide in general, there's a real lack of literacy. So I've been doing this stuff since 2006. And for the past couple of years, I've been really clear about socializing the Scrum Guide and making sure that every constituency knows what's expected of them before we implement this set of decision rights. And it's often quite shocking to people what is expected and required of them to support good Scrum. And they learn that through studying the Scrum Guide under the guidance of a teacher or a mentor who can call up certain lines from the Scrum Guide and put them right on the table and see how people like them. One of the ones that's often not agreed upon at all is for the product owner to be successful, everyone in the organization must respect his or her decisions. You know, a lot of folks don't even realize that's in the guide. So I think if we take a step back, we can take 3 steps forward after we get some of this literacy going. So that's the way I approach it. And it's some of us listening here might want to try that in their own shop.
So I love it, Daniel. Before I don't know if anybody else wants to comment on that. While we're thinking about it, though, the going back to the basics, right? This was all started, right? We've got that Scrum Guide for a reason. If we're not looking back to the fundamental reasons we're doing Scrum, we agree we probably can't scale it effectively. So I certainly love that advice. JJ, I thought I saw you a minute ago. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, I about training in particular. I'm not sure if you have to train everybody in an organization, but you have to have a common language. And it can come right out of the Scrum Guide. It can come out of the Scrum Scale Guide. It can come out of training. But because there, as Dan pointed out, there are a bunch of misconceptions about what's in the Scrum Guide, what Agile is, what Scrum is. Yes. I often will see people use the same words and mean really different things.
Yes.
And those are the worst arguments ever. Because so you want to make sure, okay, in our organization, when we say this word, this is what that word means.
Beautiful.
Yes, absolutely. I in my classes when I'm teaching, I always say the first thing a Scrum Master has to do when they go in is do baseline lexicon. Even if they've supposedly been doing Scrum before, do a baseline lexicon. So at least in our team, we're talking the same language.
Yeah, Simon, I think you've been waiting patiently. Let's go to you real quick.
Thanks. you know, I don't think formal Scrum training is a necessity, but I think it can be a very good start. You have to be very careful about choosing where you actually get the information from. To be frank, there is some misinformation. I'm just really reflecting what others have said already. There are some you know, organizations starting up overnight and offering Scrum certifications. You know, whether you go to Scrum Alliance or Scrum Inc. or even Scrum.org, you know, if you get a great trainer, that can be a great source of the truth about Scrum, you know, what really Scrum really is. So it's a really good start. And some of my clients have had a lot of success when they've trained the whole company in Scrum. I'm thinking one particular company where they actually held a 2-day Scrum training for everybody in the company, about 80 people. And that was a great way to get everybody on the same page.
Excellent. I mean, it sounds a little bit like heresy though, Simon. You're basically saying after I attend a 2-day certified Scrum Master course, I'm not necessarily an expert. Is that right?
Absolutely not.
Seriously?
No, it's just the start.
Absolutely.
It's just the start.
This is not what I signed up for. No, I think it's a great point, and all of us would probably agree that training by itself is not an answer, right?
No.
It's a piece of a larger solution, and if we just try to leave it to train people and run away, it's just not gonna. There's not gonna be value, right? People need help to apply it when they got on the ground. So with that, let me. We've got a few things left to hit. I want to make sure we go to Rena. One of the things Rena's going to start talking about here, if we can go to the next slide, is the executive action team, which I love because, you know, it's part of the way we instantiate, that we help leaders be part of this transformation every day. So Rena, you want to take it?
Sure. So I work quite a lot with the executive level. I've been working with management before I even knew what Scrum or Agile was. So I'm familiar with these kind of people's, how they think. And I think one thing that I always come across is that Agile is a word that all the executives use right now. They have no idea what that means. Many people think it's just faster. Let's do the old thing, but be faster, and not understand that fast is an outcome of doing things very differently. And what we usually do is go in and challenge them a little bit. So ask them a bit of questions of, is this happening? Do you have POs? For instance, do you have POs in your company that can make decisions on the go on products? Are you delivering each sprint something that can be validated, that could be shipped to clients? We ask a couple of questions and make them realize, oh, we thought we were Agile, but we're not. And that's the way how to open up them for a bit of training, a bit of more information, a bit of knowledge, where we start then developing these executive action teams. And that is, if we want to scale agility and Scrum across an organization, what you will need is people on board with a core team that can make decisions about processes, policies, the organization, the structure, the line management, etc., that can help get rid of these organizational impediments that are in hindering the scaling of Scrum and success of these teams. So that is what we usually set up. We can call it a transformation team, a core transformation team. In Scrum at Scale, it's called Executive Action Team. Who should sit on this team is some executives that are kind of change leaders, people who are Scrum experts and Agile experts, people who can get rid of or change policies. For instance, we talk quite quickly about performance management and reward. Those need to start being changed in organizations to scale, So we want maybe the HR people on board there as well. So this is the team where really the higher level change decisions can be made. Can I get to the next slide, please? Right, I already talked about that. We also want somebody from finance to be on board here, by the way, because quite quickly, if you think about what happens when you start moving from maybe from a traditional organization towards a more agile organization, there's always going to be tension between these two. It is either, even if you've got just a couple of teams working with Agile, there's going to be tension to the traditional organization, or if you're doing end-to-end streams or units that do Agile, there's going to be tensions. So it's very important that these people who make these decisions about practices, processes, and policies are understanding how these two different operating systems work. And finance is also one that I would say, get these people on the team, make them understand what agile means, because we need to start looking at those budgets and the way they are planning the business. So all in all, we want to have people on board with the core team that can together make important transformational decisions. That's about the EAT. And maybe sharing a couple of tips that I have. So first of all, a lot of these executive teams, they haven't really been working with agile themselves. So what works quite well when I start working with them is that I train them really well 2-3 days first, and then we start setting up the transformation backlog with them, starting to walk the talk themselves. So setting up, for instance, sprints on, usually we use about a cadence with 1 month because the executives are not that fast. So a 1 month cadence and starting to make backlog items for the transformation, seeing that those get done. What I see quite often is that executives are not used to doing things. They're used to sitting in meetings, making decisions. But when we actually have that transformation backlog up and visible for everybody to see, they start realizing, oh, we need to do that. For example, if the backlog says, everybody go and communicate this to your vice president, so then I start kind of nudging them with, as an agile coach, what does it really mean? What does it mean when you're communicated that? When is it done? When are you going to do that? So really making it tangible and practical, that's when they learn what this really is about.
Excellent. I mean, some of this, it sounds like just treating them like any other human, right? We have to make it tangible and understand what they need to do. So I think I actually saw JJ next. JJ, you want to jump in? Oh, JJ, we got you on mute, buddy.
Sorry about that. So I really agree with Rena that looking at what is coming out, are they delivering working product every sprint? Because that's something that sometimes I do see in agile transformations. People are doing this agile thing to do agile stuff rather than to get stuff done, to solve a problem, to deliver a service. And that is really, really crucial. The one part I would disagree is I always put all of my executive teams on 1 week sprints. All of them.
Me too.
Because that way they get it faster. And they're forced to go through and they get the feedback and are able to do an improvement 52 times a year instead of 12. I mean, yours might vary, Rita, but that's something I really insist upon that they do it, because it also forces them to engage and at the sprint review to show what they've actually done and be accountable for it.
Yeah, excellent. Actually, I think I saw, I love it, right? Practicing Scrum with these guys, treating them like a Scrum team. Daniel, you still have something? I think I saw you a second ago.
Yeah, just really quick. A lot of times what we're seeing is when we're scaling that they're already doing some version of Agile or Scrum. So in Scrum at Scale, the first step is to establish the EAT, right? The reality is that we need to tighten up the existing Scrum that's already there. So we can get going with that at the team level. And then the second thing is tighten up the leadership resolve around actually what's required of them to actually support scaled Scrum. So we walk the Scrum guide. We do something called Leadership Scrum. If the people here want to look at something called leadershipscrum.com, there's a Scrum-like process for leadership teams that they could work in 1 week sprints. I do something like that, like JJ said, before we do the EAT. So they actually get a sense of what's the whole flow here. So I guess what I'm saying is I have learned that establishing the EAT can come fairly soon, but doesn't have to be first, because usually they have to tighten up the Scrum they're already doing, and we've got to get the leadership team aligned on exactly what's required of them, and they need to know what's about to happen. A lot of times they don't know what's required, and they have no idea what's about to happen. So that's my thought on the EAT.
Excellent. I love that, Daniel. Before Simon, I'll get to you in 1 sec. I want to throw out a real world example of that, right? What we don't want to do, I think, is scare people into thinking they've got to implement all this at once. I think when Simon threw this out, drew it up, one of the things he talked about was a process, but obviously you can tailor that process. This is all about doing things that work in your organization. So real world experience We had a program with 500 people a couple of years ago. One of the first things we did, we do two things off the bat: set up a Scale Daily Scrum, which hopefully we'll get to talk about a little later, and we set up an executive action team. We gave those executives a job early on, and they loved it. They were fantastic supporters. We drew them in every single day, and it worked fantastically. One of the executives credited that executive action team for being the reason we delivered something on time, which again, it's always great when it's just a few little things and it works that well. Simon, let me throw it over to you.
Yeah, thanks. A couple of things. One thing, I think it was on the previous slide, it mentioned that one of the things that each should be doing is setting up metrics to help understand how well the organization is doing Scrum. I think a really crucial thing is that moving the needle in terms of real tangible results for the real products rather than Agile just for the sake of Agile is really crucial. So things that, that ultimately, if the organization isn't delivering better results, then the executive action team hasn't done its job very well. I think that's really crucial. So make sure that your metrics are about moving that needle rather than just how many teams have been trained, how many teams have been launched in Scrum. I mean, that's great progress, but it really needs to be about better results for the organization.
Yeah,
I think that's the crucial thing.
What do you measure? JJ Sutherland, do you have a thought on that?
Sure, I just wanted to share a story that my father told me about the first Scrum team. And he said, he went to them and he said, listen, you know how management is always screaming at you? They're always late, they're interrupting you all the time, they're really treating you poorly, all this kind of stuff. And they said, yeah, it's horrible. He says, I will make all of that go away, but you have to deliver. You have to deliver results, because if you don't, all of that will become screaming back. And so I was agreeing with Simon, it's like getting results quickly. And I think going to sort of the people part, what Rena was saying earlier, is that people like to be successful. They like to deliver value, to create value for the world. And that's one of the strongest motivations in humans. And having Scrum to do that, what I found is, well, yes, sometimes you have to really get people to do it and be the dental chair, but what really converts people is getting results. People like to win. And so that's, I'm sort of agreeing with Simon there, but really focus on that.
Excellent. Okay, we're about, let's see, it's been probably another 20 minutes. Alyssa, why don't we throw it to you? Anything else interesting in the Q&A window we want to bring up for the panel?
Sure, there is one that I think can tail end off of what the conversation has been around for the last 5 or 10 minutes. You're mentioning this iterative approach, but a couple of people are asking, are there good, effective ways to overcome the crawl, walk, run being used as an excuse? i.e., we have an example of someone in an organization using crawl basically to just name existing structures with Scrum/Agile terms.
Yeah.
So how do you make sure that your iterative approach is successful?
Right. So it sounds like, how do you balance, hey, we need to get better at this, with not starting in such a way where we box ourselves into a corner and give ourselves an excuse for not doing it right. And Daniel, looks like you've got a thought.
Yeah, very quickly, JJ mentioned things about words and definitions, and I want to point something out. Shared agreements about word definitions constitute small contracts by and between the members. So when we agree on what the word Agile means, what the word Scrum means, what the word Kanban means, and then we go back and we look at the rules for those things, now when we say Scrum, we're all singing from the same sheet of music. If you don't do that exercise up front, if you don't get agreement on what words mean, you're just going to have a Tower of Babel, and it'll just continue until you straighten this out. So I really want the folks here to understand and play with the idea that word definitions are, when they're shared, those are agreements, and those agreements, we can build coordination, we can build cooperation, we can build progress and deliver results. Like JJ said, we can all experience progress together. But if we don't have that up front, We don't have anything at all, because when you say Agile and I say Agile, you say Scrum, I say Scrum, we're just talking past each other. We don't even have a shared language. So I go from the beginning with a shared language, and you'd be surprised how many people are unwilling to agree to a word definition.
Oh, yes. Well, it's a great kickoff, right? You can't even get people to agree on what Agile is. Simon, what do you think?
I mean, I totally agree. And I think this is, self-organization always happens. You can't stop it happening. Whether it goes in the right direction or not, if that's a different matter. So it's like, you need a container in which, and a set of rules for self-organization to work. Unless we've got shared understandings of what these things mean, that self-organization is going to be chaotic. So when kicking off a Scrum at Scale transformation or an introduction, it's really crucial to get these things clear. And this goes down to what I was saying about self-selecting teams as well. Unless people understand what are the constraints, what does a first-class cross-functional team look like, then they won't be able to do that. But so there's a role for education. In the case of one client, so it's a business unit of about 80 people, led by a very progressive senior leadership team. The head of the business unit, senior vice president in a major German company, and they hired me as a coach, and we spent quite a lot of time educating people on what do these things actually mean before we held the first open space meeting. So this is crucial.
Excellent. Well, I tell you what, why don't we, Alyssa, why don't we move on to the next slide? Let's go ahead and hit the executive Metascrum. So we talked about, yeah, we could hit that as well. We talked about sort of the EAT, right? Which is one of the two, for lack of a better term, Hydra heads here of organizing concepts across the organization. JJ, did you want to give us a second to introduce the executive Metascrum team?
Sure, and I actually begin here rather than with the EAT, because I always say you have to have something that you're going to do before you can talk about how you're going to do it. And so the executive Metascrum team, or the chief product owner team, whatever you want to call it, I mean, there's some definitional stuff there, but it's the group of leaders who decide what are the priorities across the organization. And in a very large organization, this could be a portfolio of different priorities. But what really matters is, because often when I go into, I'm thinking about this one software company that I went into, it's about 500 people. And all the senior leaders were telling all the teams different things because they didn't talk to each other. And, and sales might have one set of priorities, and engineering has another set of priorities, and management has another set of priorities, but they never talk to each other about what those priorities are. And getting them into the room and forcing them to choose what are the priorities. We got to stack rank everything. And doing that gets the leadership team deciding this is what we're going to do. We have a vision of ourselves as an organization, what we are trying to accomplish. This is the order we're going to do this accomplishment. The other thing that happens, I'm thinking about this one company went into, it's a engineering and manufacturing company, like what do they make? They manufacture physical goods. And they, what else would you manufacture? But when we went in, they had 135 projects going. They had 200 engineers.
All priority, I'm sure, JJ.
All top priority.
All top priority. Must have.
If you have 130, if you have more than a couple, if you have, the priority is a singular noun. If you have 135 top priorities, you don't have priorities.
Right.
And what that means is the most junior person in your organization gets to decide what your corporate strategy is. Because they get to pick what to work on, right? You're not giving them a vision. So the executive Metascrum needs to be able to set that vision and that priorities. So someone at the team level says, okay, I can, like a product owner, even as a team member can say, I know why this is important. I know how it ties back into that higher level priority that the organization has made very, very clear from the executive Metascrum. And so that's one of the reasons I think it's so critical And I begin here, and then the backlog of this, some of it, oh, well, we do need to eat to take care of that as we form teams. And I do like to have, okay, let's form the backlogs. And then we say, okay, what teams do we need to deliver those backlogs? Rather than start with teams. And sometimes, I think so with this company, they got down to 12 projects, and the product owners went into the room in front of all the engineers and scientists and manufacturing people and said, okay, here's the 12 different things we're going to work on. Who should be on which team? Then they walked out of the room and let the team members decide who should be on which team.
Yeah.
Not many of my clients will trust their people enough to do that, but I do like it when it happens. But again, it's forming the teams around the work. And I think that that's really important because sometimes people just put together teams for no reason.
Right. Excellent, JJ Sutherland. I just want to comment real briefly. You know, one of the things, again, you talked about the real world story with your physical manufacturing product organization. I think, you know, we've done this in the government as well. The executive minister Scrum team, one of the great things is it exposes, right? We can help them expose what we're really working on as an organization. So what we've done some places is align, hey, you've got 1,000 people and you say these are your top 10 priorities. How many people are actually focused on those priorities?
Or
right?
aware of them.
Or even aware, absolutely. And it's eye-opening. And this leads to, I think probably everybody's, here's the term, we won't use dark work, but invisible work, hidden work. It turns out that these, you know, the senior executives a lot of times aren't really aware of what those people on the actual teams are doing. And if they had the choice, they would say, wow, that's not where I want to be focusing my time.
Yeah, I think just before JJ started introducing the Meta Scrum, the point I was going to add was the necessity for a vision. If an organization doesn't have a concrete vision of where it's trying to go, it's going to make you ask, why are they doing what they're doing? Why does this particular product exist? Where is it taking you in the marketplace? Are you really in the marketplace you even want to be in? So I think the vision is crucial, and then the communication of that. And if communication doesn't happen properly, we're going to have this miscommunication. And if I get miscommunication, when I think what I'm working on is valuable, it's not. So communication we've got to make sure, I use this little formula, that communication is not communication until the communication sent is the communication received, as in received in the same context. Because if I say something and you hear something totally different, we haven't communicated.
How is that possible, Lizzie? Right. We all know what we mean, right? I mean, this is why requirements
human thing.
Well, we can just write the stuff down, hand it over to somebody, and they'll know what to do.
No, we gotta collaborate. Collaborate means talking and clarification. We mustn't be frightened to clarify. Did I hear that you've just said? Is that what you mean? No, that's not what I said.
So key. JJ, did you have a quick follow-up?
I did, but what Lizzie said is really, really important. So in my past life, I was a journalist for a long time for NPR, which is sort of the American version of the BBC if you're from overseas. And so I taught people how to be writers for 15, 20 years, and people are horrible at it. People are horrible, horrible, horrible writers. That is the worst way to communicate between two people. There are very few people in the world who can write something down and have someone else think, feel, and know exactly what both the emotional, the spiritual, and the physical and the content, what it all means. And if you're one of those people, you shouldn't be on this webinar. You should be writing books and novels, because I write books, right? So I feel like I'm a halfway decent writer, and I still get into fights with my wife, texting. I even use emojis, and it doesn't help. Writing is a really horrible way to communicate.
Excellent. Rima, did you have a thought?
I have a thought about, so all of you make it sound like, oh, we just jump into a Scrum at Scale and we do prioritization. I work with a lot of pain, because when I go into transformations, they are basically working in the traditional waterfall hierarchy model, and we need to start looking at that organization, where to even start. So what we're looking at is, do we have an end-to-end stream where we could start onboarding teams into that agile model and prioritizing differently there than we do in the hierarchy. So we work with the duo model quite a lot. And to get that prioritization happening there, it means that we need to start changing the team structures from maybe from component teams to more feature teams. We need to start working with capability builds. You know, there are people that are totally unaware of how to do value-based analysis or risk-based analysis on items that should be on the backlog. They don't have this vocabulary or these even methodologies. So we need to start from quite a lot of scratch to just get them understanding that, hey, you need to prioritize with something else than just this. And here are some methods that you can use, Moscow or risk value or cost of delay. That's like magic for them. Oh, there's something like this we can use. So it's really important to understand this is going through a lot of decent consideration of where to start and how to get that start happening quite well. So I just wanted to share that thought.
Excellent. So look, I think, Rena, that's actually a great transition. If you don't mind, Alyssa, can you bring up the dual operating model slide? So this has come up a few times now. I just want to introduce this and get the panelists' feedback on it. You know, again, we don't have to start with everything at once. One of the key concepts, and I think this is a Cotter concept, or at least he popularized the idea, is that we can take an existing organization, we can ask for volunteers, let people come at their own pace, and focus on building something that resembles Scrum at scale without forcing people in the existing organization to necessarily transition, right? So I'll throw it out to the panel. Any of you guys have experience organizing with this dual operating model and real world stories about how it worked? Or not? I'll throw one. I'm going to throw one out there then. So real quick and give people time to think is, you know, we do this to some degree with anytime we kick off a new project and we are using Scrum. We have a concept called Scrum of Scrums, which I think many of you know is not a meeting. It's actually a group of teams that collaborate to deliver together. When we do that, if we allow those teams to self-select in, essentially what we've built is a little bit of a dual operating model, right? It's a little bit of a bubble, or I might call it an agile fortress, where we try to do good Scrum, and that builds that reference model that we talked about earlier. So once we build that and show people what it looks like, hopefully then we can scale more effectively without trying to transform everything at once. So, all right, so let's see. Why don't we got a couple minutes left. Alyssa, did you want to see if there's, Daniel, why don't you go ahead first? I think we have to unmute Daniel.
Sorry about that. I want to make one quick comment about the dual operating model. The left side of this diagram is where the funding comes from for the Scrum. It also is where the authorization for the time and space for all of the events takes place. So we need a little bit more. We need the budget authorization. We need the actual decision-making authorization. And we also need the leaders on the left side of this diagram to participate actively in supporting the Scrum Masters and the product owners with the authorization that Scrum provides them. So this diagram is great. We need the budgeting, we need the authorization, we also need the oomph, you know, the formal authorization backup of the Scrum Masters and product owners who represent executive intent day to day on the ground. These are the people who are actually representing the vision of the executives, or what we might call commander intent. So I love this diagram. I just want to point out that we need more than the budgeting for this thing to go. They have to be actively involved in backing up what Scrum Masters and product owners are doing every single day. And that's what the EAT is all about.
Yeah, fair enough. JJ, did I see you have something to add?
One thing I would say is that you don't have to change the org chart. Because an org chart is just sort of like, I always think it's like, that's the hardware that many very different softwares can run on. And sort of the Scrum Scale can be just how those people talk to each other. I would love it if everyone was on Scrum teams officially and they got rid of the test. That would be awesome. But like some of the groups I work with are military, you know, soldiers and sailors, you know, active duty, you know, going out and, you know, doing what troops do. You're not going to change their titles. That would require an act of Congress, but you can change how they talk to each other.
Right.
and how they interact with each other. That you can change. And so sometimes I see organizations get hung up on, well, we have to change the whole org chart, we have to do all of this, and there's this incredible amount of chaos as that happens. And if you have this, okay, we can do this other problem where the org chart's different and all this other kind of stuff. But I see them sometimes just slow down as they try to redesign their entire organization all at once, rather than saying, okay, well, let's just keep the org chart, we'll work on that in the background. And we iterate towards what the right organization is. One of the groups, one of the client I've been working with for a number of years, 3M HIS, they have a very advanced Scrum. They're very good at it. Their org chart does not look like their Scrum organization at all. So it's just really important to remember a lot of these things don't actually do it. And part of the reason is in the United States, I'm sure in other countries as well, managers have legal obligations they have to do as managers. And, it might be internal company, they say, okay, the product owner isn't a manager, but unless there is a manager, the courts will look at that person as a manager. They direct work. So therefore they're liable, they're mandatory reporters for various, harassment or discrimination, all that other kind of stuff. And so it's important to remember that as you set up the structure, that management has a critical role in organizations, and it cannot be so, oh, let's just get to these, self-organizing teams and have no management because you need it. And I was talking to my father actually about this over the weekend, and I said, Dad, I think one of the realizations I've very recently come to is that when he was putting Scrum into organizations, there was, and I think a lot of times this is true, there's a surfeit of management. There's too much management. And so he never really talked about what the role of management should be, because he was just trying to pare it down. And he said, yeah, I think that's probably right. He agreed with me. So that, thinking about where the management function sits is really important.
Yeah, I'm realizing, JJ, your access is a little bit unfair to the rest of us. I think you're going to need to open that up so that we can ask your dad questions over the weekend as well. Simon, why don't we hit you? And we've just got a couple minutes left, so you got about 1 minute, and then we're going to give it back to Alyssa to wrap up.
Thanks. I'll keep it very brief. I sort of disagree and agree at the same time. I think ultimately in the longer term, we have to change the organizational structure to get this stuff to stick. But also I agree that this thing can be iterative. So I've seen the best success when we've got an iterative approach towards more agility, where we've got this sort of dual operating system. But I think what's crucial is that there's a commitment from the managers of the people involved that they will be if they are going into Scrum mode, that they'll be mostly in Scrum mode and not a little bit in the old mode, a little bit in another mode. Or the worst case scenario is 20% on one team, 20% on another team, 20% on another team. And as we know, full-time equivalent, this whole concept is a disease, and we have to eliminate that.
100%. Yeah, so we probably ended it there. Thank you, Simon. Did you want to wrap it up with what's going to happen next, Alyssa? And she's muted, but she's...
Sorry. Absolutely. I will say there are a ton of questions in the QA panel. There are a ton of questions that came through the chat, and I just want to apologize that there were only a few that were answered. But I do want to highlight, or maybe I don't. Yeah, I do want to highlight. The Scrum at Scale trainer directory is live on the website. All of the lovely panelists who participated today, all of their contact info is on there. You can find them, find their LinkedIn profiles, contact them via their websites. They're also hosting practitioner courses all over the world. You can attend in person or virtually. Those are definitely where you're going to deep dive into the framework a little bit more. And there's also some links on here if you feel inclined to download the slides or watch the recording after, which will be on the website within 24 hours. And
Great.
I think that's it. Thank you guys so much for organizing this, especially to Dave for wrangling everybody. And thank you to all of the panelists. I think that the number of questions and the number of things in the chat right now speak to how engaged and how excited this audience is.
Excellent.
Well, thank you to the
everybody.
audience for coming on and listening to us talk about the stuff that we're passionate about.
Absolutely. Perfect.
Thank you all. That was
Thanks,
really fun.
everybody.
All right. Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
Alyssa.
Bye.
Bye.